Normally when I've talked about Arcane, I've tried to come from a pretty analytical standpoint. I've talked about characters, I've talked about big moments, I've talked about motivations, and I've talked about every single thing in between. But honestly, it's kind of hard to even do any of that justice when discussing the final act. Because there's in fact so much to talk about that there's no way I'll be able to get it all. Still, I'll do my best, but before I do, we actually have a pretty relevant sponsor. Before we continue this video, I just want to give a massive shout out to today's sponsor, PUBG Mobile. And get this, they're doing a collaboration with Arcane, featuring their new themed game mode, Mirror World. Enveloped in powerful energy, Mirror Island descends on PUBG Mobile as the dimensions merge. Enter the floating island and fight as Arcane heroes. Explore the story clues of the events in the Arcane world, collect hex shards, and help the future Guardians send the Mirror Island back to the real world in order to preserve the peace. Land on this huge floating island above Erangel. Explore the island for supplies and retreat safely before the energy is activated. But be careful, because the hex energy is incredibly unstable. When you make contact with the wind wall on the surface of Erangel, you will be sent to Piltover or Zon on Mirror Island. How cool is that? You can transform to either Jinx, Vi, Jace, or Caitlyn, and battle players with new weapons and skills. And if you're defeated, you get sent back to Erangel in your original form. You can interact with Jinx, Vi, or Jace to get clues about what happened in the world of Arcane. Defeat the Enforcers and Firelights who land on Erangel to get more hex shards to help the heroes return to their world before Arcane disappears. There are also Shimmer Berserkers who invaded, so be careful, because you have to defeat them too. One more massive shout out to PUBG Mobile for sponsoring the video. You guys are awesome. Go check out their Arcane event. It's super sick. Now let's get back into the content. Now that we're getting into it, here's your spoiler warning. It's on the screen right now. Please do not continue the video if you haven't seen Arcane yet, because I don't want to spoil anything for you and I want you to feel the emotional payout. The video's not going anywhere, so just come on back after you're done watching Arcane so that you can see what I have to say. I'll be here waiting. Now, let's get into it. Firstly, I want to talk about something that a lot of people may not have considered: marketing. The brilliance of Arcane was that every single act, which released within a week of one another, felt like their own pieces of work, moving at their own rates independently, albeit connected as a whole, coming together more like a trilogy of films more than a 9-part animation. This power is further exemplified by the fact that all 3 of these acts ended in insane cliffhangers, which meant that this was literally the only thing anyone was talking about during the 3 weeks of Arcane's release. This also prevented that supernova effect from happening that ends up happening to a lot of TV shows these days, where Netflix releases a show in its entirety only for all the viewers to binge it in one night and then stop talking about it forever. Here's to you. In this way, Arcane was brilliant, building to a climax that appeased both the bingers and the people who like to take their time. But now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of Act 3. To say that Act 3 gave me everything I wanted out of Arcane would not only be accurate, but almost an understatement. In its 120-minute runtime, my jaw was dropped for about 90% of it. It starts with the big reveal that Echo is the leader of the Firelights. And then it moves in such a breakneck pace that if you look away, blink, or go to the bathroom, you might miss a key moment in the show. For example, when Echo and Vi embrace for the first time, Echo, the rough and tough leader of the Firelights, actually cries. It's very much a look away or you'll miss it moment because it's a single teardrop, but it signifies that Echo never really had a chance to grow up. He acts a lot older than he actually is. And maturity is something that unfortunately can't be learned, as we find out later in the episode. During Echo's showdown with Jinx, you see that there's still attachment when Echo pulls out a watch so that they can play this game they used to play as kids, where Jinx has to shoot Echo on a target that he wears on his chest, while Echo has to dodge and close the distance. Only this time, it's not a game, it's a matter of death. And eventually, Echo's young and vulnerable nature is exploited in the bridge fight with Jinx, because though he gets the upper hand, he can't seem to let go of the part that used to play games with her as a kid. Whereas Jinx, raised by corrupt and very sinister people, is able and willing to make the ultimate sacrifice and light that bridge up like a Pixar film. At the same time, Victor, who is still getting sicker at an alarming rate, continues to cast all of his judgment to the side in order to repair his body to some avail. And I genuinely believe that one of the most powerful moments in this masterpiece of a show is Victor running on his own two legs for what appears to be the first time in his entire life. It's such a powerful scene because though it's just someone running, the implication is that against Heimerdinger's wishes, the Hex Core is doing exactly what he wanted. Unfortunately, that statement isn't entirely true unless Victor wanted to date a bag of dust. With Sky now looking a lot more like ground, Victor makes the executive decision to destroy the Hex Core. But he can't because he finds his body somewhat linked to it and therefore controlled. And then there's Jace, who is somewhat newly a counselor at this point, starting to battle with the politics that come with this position of power. Eventually storming the front lines by creating Hextech weaponry and launching him and Vi into one of the greatest fight scenes I've ever seen in my entire life. Vi and Jace prove just how absolutely metal they are by beating the absolute brakes off of a ton of Shimmer Wraiths. And then, in this insanely cinematic fight, there's an abrupt end, and we find out why Jace says one of his most famous voice lines. "I'm gonna shoot a kid." But honestly, when Jace shoots the kid, it is such an unexpected moment that the entire room that I watched this in went quiet. And since I watched this literally at the world premiere held by Riot Games, that's saying something. This moment leads to internal conflict with Jace, making him realize just how tragic this pseudo-war they're in actually is. Eventually, Jace strikes a deal with Silco, which will basically end all of the bloodshed and grant the Undercity the ability to become the nation of Zaun, in exchange for a lot of things, one of them being Jinx. Jinx finds out, and then hatches her own plan to make everything come to a head in a very dark and twisted way. Jinx kidnaps Caitlyn, which is easy for some fucking reason, while Vi, in her quest to hunt down Silco, ends up fighting Savika in what is quite possibly the best fight scene in this entire series. It's loud, it's rough, it's beautiful. You get to see Vi's passive come into play, which is a shock and a brilliant nod to anyone who's ever played League of Legends. There's even a point where Vander gives Vi words of encouragement, which is a lot more emotional than I expected it to be. Because though that character was short-lived, he was such a unique and powerful individual. And then Jinx kidnaps Vi and everything comes to a head. Heimerdinger and Echo become homies. Jace holds a vote with the other counselors to see if they'll grant the Undercity the ability to become the nation of Zaun. And Jinx sits everybody down at a dinner table in the spot that Vander was killed. There are 2 empty seats available, one for Powder and one for Jinx, symbolic of who she will become after this big moment. Jinx brings Vi an ultimatum. If Vi were to just shoot Caitlyn, she'll go back to being her lovable little sister, Powder. A lot of stuff happens, but in the end, Silco tries to blindside Jinx and shoot her while she's in a standoff with Caitlyn. And Jinx, having the reaction time of a super mutant, ends up countering and shooting Silco instead. And here's when you really start to sympathize with the bad guy of Season 1. You see, Silco was going to shoot Jinx, but not because he wanted to. Rather, he saw a greater good for the nation of Zaun by bringing this treaty of peace. Understanding that Piltover and Jace wanted to capture Jinx and make her suffer for the rest of her life, the thought was unbearable to Silco, Jinx's now father figure. And this is shown when Silco is drinking near a statue of Vander and sharing his woes. So, in an act of mercy, he tried to blindside Jinx for his people. There was genuine love there, a recurring theme in Silco's fatherly relationship with Jinx. Which is why when Jinx counters and shoots Silco in the chest, she starts to cry immediately. And that's when Silco replies, "I wasn't gonna give you to them. Not for anything. Don't cry. You're perfect." Silco dies, and even though he was the center of a lot of child death in this show, and I mean a lot, you still feel bad in this moment. Not just for him, but for Jinx, who has now lost her third father figure. She cries, she has a quick change of emotion, and realizes who she has to be. And thus, she sits on the chair titled Jinx, and realizes that her relationship with her sister, in her own mind, cannot be mended. She then grabs a Hextech-powered rocket, takes aim at the Capitol, and launches a tactical nuke at the meeting being held by Jace, Caitlyn's mom, Medarda, and all the other counselors. And that's the end of Season 1. And obviously, there's a ton that I missed because I wanted to focus on the stories that did have a climax. And there's a reason why I did that. You see, Arcane has always managed to walk the fine line between finale and beginning. Climaxes are happening at the same time that other stories are blossoming that are just as enthralling. Sure, we had the death of Silco, who was a very big character in Act 1, and the creation of Jinx, but also in Act 3 we meet Ambessa, aka MILF Baddie, aka Medarda's mom, aka Noxian Warlord, aka holy shit, Noxus is about to be in Season 2 of Arcane. Heimerdinger presumably goes with Echo and the Firelights. Vi and Caitlyn are still gay as hell. Good for them. Victor continues to take steps towards insanity. There's a shit ton of birds everywhere, which likely points to Swain being the main antagonist of Season 2. And if he goes back to Benzo's and picks up that Leandries, that's going to be a big problem for the rest of the cast. Oh, and also Cinch just has Warwick in his Nintendo Labo. In short, I genuinely cannot wait for Arcane Season 2. Arcane Season 1 was amazing, and it was better than anything I could have ever dreamed or imagined. And I've thought of so many ways to end this video. I've written it over and over again, but nothing felt right. But then, one day on stream, this happened. So I'll let me take it away. The sappy thing I want to say about Riot Games is I, alongside a lot of other people, right? Like, I lost a bit of a faith. A little bit of faith, I'll be honest, in League of Legends. It got to a point where all they were doing was making the game more complicated. But when you make the game more complicated, you're alienating new players. And the route that they were going for a while was not to bring in new faces, to bring in new people who care, to bring in, to bring in new players or whatever. It was to find a way to keep the players from quitting. They wanted to keep the players that were there, but they weren't doing anything to get new players. I was questioning the validity of League of Legends' future. But then, out of nowhere, out of the blue, they drop Ruined King. They drop Arcane. They drop Ziggs Hextech Mayhem. They drop a bunch of stuff. And the stuff that they do is so phenomenal that right now, is probably out of everything, including Season 3, Season 4, Faker's first victory, whatever the heck, right? Right now is the most I have ever believed in Riot Games. Because Arcane, and it's not just me, Arcane is my favorite show right now. And I know a lot of people who mirror that. Arcane is the favorite show of a lot of people that I met. To give you guys an example of how much Arcane means to me, I told my brothers to watch Arcane, and I can show you right now. Let me see if this works. Look at this. Like, I know it's like a cheesy thing, but it's like, I need you to understand what this means to me. I've played League of Legends now for 12 years or some shit, a ridiculous amount of time. And though my brothers they do show interest, what are they going to do? They don't play games. They don't play MOBAs. They're never going to get into it. Read this. Let me see. Is it mirrored? You can't read it all. And basically, my brother, he said, so Heimerdinger is a Yordle. I'm reading on LoL right now, and there's a few of them in the game. They're little furry guys that have long lifespans, right? And I was like, yeah, they can't die of age or something like that. And he says, I'm legit reading all of the character bios. There's quite a few heroes in Arcane. My brother, who has witnessed me go from like a struggling, trying to figure out what he's doing with his life to like this YouTuber who, has actual followers, has people who watch his content, makes money off of playing this game that he's loved for such a long time. He witnessed me go from all of that, but he never really understood what any of it was. To have my brother message me about League of Legends lore is something that I don't think I can ever explain the feeling of. There's so much beauty in what Riot Games is doing right now for its player base and for the people who love League of Legends. And that's why I'm saying that Arcane is not just my favorite show, but it managed to reinvigorate my love for League of Legends. It felt hard sometimes to think that there was still 70 champions to go for Can We Talk About This. But now I can't even tell you guys how excited I am to get back on the wagon. So that is why I like Arcane so much.